We're focused on Methodist Town today, so we're going to get your story about Methodist Town. So first, can you just give me your name, please?
Goliath, John Davis III.
Thank you. And your birthday, please.
March 2nd, 1951.
Great. Can you tell me where you grew up?
Here in Methodist Town.
Perfect. What was it like growing up in Methodist Town?
It was like nothing that you could ever imagine. It was a true community. We were pretty much what I call circumscribed. Methodist Town, boundary-wise, went from about 5th Avenue North to 2nd Avenue North, from M.L. King Street over to about 12 Lane. And other than to leave this area for school or to venture downtown with your parents or what have you, we were pretty much here in this area. So, and everybody knew everybody. So the old adage about it takes a village, this was truly a village.
Okay, perfect. Did you stay in one house in Methodist Town, or did you move around?
I was in several houses. I was delivered by Miss Roxana and that house, and I can't remember that address, but then we subsequently moved to 421 and a half 11th Street North. I stayed there a while, and from there I went to 282 Jackson Street North and stayed there, and then from there to 1154 3rd Terrace.
So you lived in three
Pretty-
places?
All right in just a throne's throw of each other, not very far.
So which one of those three do you really consider your childhood home?
All three, because you're with family and loved ones. So it was just a progress. Each time you move, you were moving to a better place.
Tell me about the homes that you lived in. What were they like?
421 and a half was upstairs unit. Only had 2 bedrooms. Mind you, my mom had 10 kids. We didn't have any hot water or anything like that. Had a tin roof. When it rained, we used to play what we call the bucket brigade because the roof leaked, so we had to go around and make sure that things didn't get wet. We had a kerosene stove, so it was, if you look back on it, you would have one impression, but when you're growing up, it was like paradise. So.
What were your favorite things to do in the neighborhood?
We used to play ball a lot. We sneak off and go fishing and crabbing down at what we call the bay, and we would go on mango hunts and do those kind of things. But roller skating was another favorite activity, riding bicycles. But there was this thing where you go out during the day and you play or whatever, but when the street lights came in, you had to be within earshot of your mother's voice, because when she called, you had to be in. So, and unlike the kids today, we beg to go outside. You can't kick kids today outside to do anything, but we beg to go outside. Never want to stay inside. But as I said, when the street lights came on, you knew you had to be within earshot.
You mentioned that Methodist Town was really a community, that everyone knew everyone.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, when I think back now in terms of Methodist Town, I think in terms of religion, for example. I think in terms of education. I think in terms of business, and then just community and characters. For example, when you look at religion, I would venture to say Methodist Town had more churches per square mile than any other community in the city of St. Pete. We're sitting here at Bethlehem, from which the area got its name, and diagonally across the street was Mount Olive Primitive, and if you went west, you would run into Grace Mary Baptist Church, and from Grace Mary you could go to St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church, and then if you went south, there was 10th Street Church of God in Christ. So within the small area, you had all of those churches that people attended. So from from a religious perspective, that was great. Educationally, we were under a segregated system most of the time until integration came about. But we had teachers who lived in the community with us. For example, at 282 Jackson Street North, the house next door was Miss Beasley, who was a teacher. You went further towards Burlington Avenue was Miss Brooks. Then we had Miss McLean, we had Miss Postdale. Miss Postdale wasn't a teacher, but she actually worked at Davis Elementary School, so it was like she was a teacher because she was a figure in your life. Then we had Ella Mary Holmes, who was on about 3rd Avenue and 11th Street. And her name was Holmes, but she was a James. Chester James was her father. So when you look at the Jamestown housing complex, it's named after Chester James. Ella Mary was Chester's daughter. So our educators were all in the community, and you know, we came home with educators, we came home to educators, we went to school with educators. So it was very, very close-knit that way.
And education sounds really important.
It was, very much so.
Can you tell me about going to school?
Went to school, Davis Elementary was where I went for 6 years. And from Davis Elementary, I went to 16th Street. At the time, it was junior high school. Today, it's John Hopkins Middle School. And from there to St. Pete High.
And you said you went to school with educators, you came home to educators.
That's right.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was really interesting because today I'm on several task forces dealing with education and the achievement gap. And much is made about the achievement gap and this whole belief that black kids can't learn. Well, we were here experiencing all of the things that they now attributed to a kid's inability to learn. You look back, I didn't know I was poor, looking back today, but I was poor. You know, we had poverty, you know, we had substandard housing and on and on. But out of all of that, people flourished. People were educated, people moved on. For example, we've had several PhDs to come out of Methodist Town. I'm one of them. In one house, Miss Susie Walker had two, a PhD in psychology and a PhD in biology. Dr. Reginald Jones and Dr. Yvonne Jones. And I can go on and on and on with others from this community who've gone on to do great things. And I don't buy into this adage that kids who are poor can't learn. And one of the reasons that we were able to do so well is that people who taught us loved us. Because I said we went to school with educators. We came home to educators. And the last thing you want to do was misbehave, because you knew that if you did, all the teacher had to do was walk down the road or walk next door and say to your parent, this is what's going on. So we had a lot of parental involvement as well.
Tell me about some of the businesses and the places that you went to in Methodist Town.
And prior to, we thought integration was going to be a boom, but it really destroyed a lot of the pillars in the community, because we had just booming businesses in this particular community, as well as south of Central. For example, when I think about the business people here, I think about Moses Cotton, Buddy Mose. He was a barber. I think about Mr. Bugs Barbershop on Burlington Avenue. On Burlington Avenue, I can start at one end, Chester James Jr., who was the son of Chester James Sr. Not only was he the pastor of the 10th Street Church of God in Christ, but he had a shoe repair store on Burlington Avenue, right around 10th Street. You had Bill Dean, who had a restaurant there. As I said, Bugs Barbershop was there. We had Mr. Roy Mitchell, who owned the pool room or the billiards room on that particular area. If you go just to the west of us on Burlington Avenue, there was Bill Gregory initially on the restaurant there. He also owned the grocery store that was directly across from the restaurant. When he moved and opened his business over on 18th Avenue and about 19th Street, a guy by the name of Alan Green took over his space for the restaurant, and he added a beer joint or beer garden. Latimer Jones came in and took over the grocery store that was previously occupied. So, you know, we understood businessmen, we understood business, because just as we were surrounded by education, we were also surrounded by businesses and business owners and people who operated and owned those businesses. So it was pretty interesting. Mr. J.P. Moses, he owned not only a dry cleaner, but he was a bailiff barman, and he was on the corner of Burlington Avenue and Jackson Street, for example. Miss Marie Nesbitt, she had several properties, and her family still has properties over here, and she basically had what we call like a boarding house where people could rent rooms and so forth. Then we had Miss Teen up on 4th Avenue in Jackson Street, same thing with the boarding house. Miss Roxanna Donaldson, who in addition to being a midwife, also was a concessionaire. She operated our beach, the segregated beach. We call it the South Mole. Now it's called Demon's Landing. So we had just a whole array of different businesses and business owners that we could look for. We had a young lady by the name of Miss Nita Spells. She was on Jackson Street. She was an excellent seamstress. So you wanted dresses made, things hemmed or whatever, she was there. So we didn't grow up not knowing that black folk were entrepreneurs and were good at it, because we grew up with a lot of very prominent business owners.
You mentioned that you thought desegregation would help, and it actually did the opposite. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, desegregation it basically destroyed our communities. A lot of folk who had means saw it as an opportunity to leave. So we lost a lot of the teachers. They moved up and became basically residents of other more affluent areas. We started to lose the core of the community, which meant that the business base didn't really have anyone to draw from, because whites were not necessarily coming into the community to do anything. So we were losing our business base as well.
So as far as, if you could paint a picture of Methodist Town before segregation and after, what would it look like?
Before segregation, Methodist Town was a cadre of shotgun houses, most of them setting up on blocks. We used to play under the houses, as a matter of fact. Very few lawns, mostly sand and dirt. And when the teachers were coming to visit us, we would make sure we go out and rake the yards and made sure that everything was neat and clean, because cleanliness was stressed. And our whole identity was wrapped in those areas. If you look now, the housing quality has improved, but the sense of community, the sense of ownership, the sense of belonging is not what it used to be.
Okay, that's all I have prepared, but I always like to ask, what haven't we talked about that's important to you?
Well, I think when you talk about Methodist Town, and I talked a lot about businesses and what have you, but we had some individuals. I spent a lot of time going to school and doing other things, but for leisure time, we would kind of gather around the pool room and what have you. And there were just individual personalities that you could all learn so much from. I mean, there's a guy that used to walk the streets of Methodist Town. I don't know what his first name is, but they call him Son Shivers, and I call Son Shivers the philosopher, because he would walk and philosophize about people and life and what should happen and what shouldn't happen. You know, you hear those stories and you remember those stories. We had a guy named Charlie Carter, okay, and we used to call him Mr. CC. Charlie Carter, he was a slow-talking guy, loved to drink his brewskis, but once he got slightly tipped, I mean, he could share with you life stories that you couldn't buy anywhere else. We had another young man by the name of Freeman Green. We call him Beeline. He was another one of the street philosophers that knew everything. I mean, historically, he will talk to you about Joe Louis and who he fought, when he fought him, what the outcome of the fight was. Talked about just African American institutions and how they emerged and what have you. So we learned a lot, not only within the walls of the school, but from the individuals that we had an opportunity to interface with, individuals who'd fought in world wars and so forth, and came back and just stressed the benefit of doing whatever. I tell people all the time, I'm a PhD, but I got my very first degree at Burlington and Jackson University, Burlington Avenue and Jackson Street. That's where my first degree came from, sitting at the feet of these individuals, listening to their stories and becoming educated in terms of life and what it meant to be successful.
Tell me about some of the lessons that you learned from them that really stick out.
I learned the lesson basically that was amplified about respect, dignity, standing up for what was right. I'm very outspoken, and that comes from a lot of what I learned on those corners. I learned about our history, our heroes, and those who were sung and those who were unsung. I learned the worth of work. As my mom and grandma used to say, you know, every job has dignity. So whether you're sweeping the street or you're throwing garbage or whatever, be dignified about it and do it to the best of your ability. Those are the kind of things that we learned from our community, our fathers. And, you know, nobody was looked down upon. And I say all the time, every time there's a funeral from a Methodist town descendant, if I'm in town, if I'm not in town, when I hear it, I always attend. And I always open up with this saying, there's no family like a Methodist town family.
Yes.
There's no family like a Methodist town family, because I don't care when anyone hears about anyone who's from Methodist town, they're down and out. Guess what? We all gather, we all rally, and we all come to the need, and that's all the way down to death. So we come to honor our dead as well. So when you ask me what it's like to live here, I'll tell you there's no family like a Methodist town family.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right.